that Africa needs to re-engage among itself and decided on the best way we can save the people.
The news thundered across the globe like a political earthquake, in a joint declaration issued from Windhoek, Lusaka, and Gaborone. The leaders of Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana confirmed what many had whispered but few believed possible: the creation of a borderless Africa alliance. This was not just another trade agreement, not a symbolic gesture. It was a rupture in history itself. For the first time in modern Africa, 3 sovereign nations officially dismantled their colonial-era borders, allowing the free movement of people, goods, and ideas as if those borders had never existed. Border posts that once stood as monuments of separation were suddenly reimagined. Families, long accustomed to queues, papers, and bribes, now walked freely with nothing more than a national ID. Trucks carrying copper, diamonds, and cattle rolled across once restricted crossings without drowning in customs paperwork. Witnesses at the border described the atmosphere as surreal, electric, like history itself had shifted beneath their feet. Across African media, headlines blazed with excitement. Colonial borders fall in southern Africa, declared one Namibian outlet. In Lusaka, callers flooded radio stations calling it the return of Africa to itself. In Botswana, students gathered outside government buildings waving flags, chanting about unity and freedom. On social media, videos went viral of people crossing borders with tears in their eyes, ordinary Africans tasting real freedom of movement for the first time. But while Africans celebrated, the Western world panicked. Within hours, the U.S. State Department issued a carefully worded statement, welcoming regional cooperation but warning of risks to stability and security. Behind closed doors, however, Washington went into crisis mode. American envoys scrambled onto flights bound for Lusaka and Gaborone. Their mission was urgent: slow this down, water it down, and place conditions that would dilute its revolutionary power. Why the panic? The answer lies in minerals, money, and power. Namibia holds some of the world's richest uranium reserves, vital for nuclear energy. Zambia's copper and cobalt are the lifeblood of electric vehicles, batteries, and global electronics. Botswana's diamonds dominate the luxury trade. Separately, each nation is valuable, but together, under one borderless system, they wield bargaining power that the West has spent decades trying to prevent. The ripple effects are already being felt. European corporations are recalculating contracts. Mining giants, long accustomed to playing one African country against another, now face the terrifying possibility of 3 acting as one. Even financial markets, often indifferent to African politics, reacted nervously as investors speculated on the alliance's impact on global resource flows. In Africa, however, the response has been overwhelmingly hopeful. Activists, intellectuals, and citizens hailed it as the boldest step toward Pan-Africanism since independence. Many called it a direct strike at the infamous Berlin Conference of 1884-85, the meeting where European powers, without a single African present, carved up the continent with rulers and maps, dividing communities for colonial convenience. For more than a century, those artificial lines have dictated African life. Entire families were split between colonies. Ancient trade routes were severed. Whole kingdoms were divided, so that they could never rise united against colonial rule. Borders were never drawn for Africa, they were weapons of control. Even after independence in the 20th century, those lines remained intact. Why? Because the West insisted on it. International law froze colonial borders in place under the doctrine of uti possidetis juris. The message was clear: Europe might leave, but its maps would stay, ensuring Africa remained divided, dependent, and exploitable. The results were devastating. Intra-African trade suffocated. A truck of copper from Zambia to Namibia required endless paperwork, bribes, and clearance, as if neighbors lived in separate worlds. Economies faced outward, serving Europe and America, while trade within Africa was strangled. Colonial borders were more than lines, they were chains. Chains that kept Africa's wealth flowing outward, chains that ensured Africans saw each other as foreigners, chains that turned unity into a dream. The Borderless Africa Alliance shatters those chains, by allowing free movement with just a national ID. Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana are making a radical declaration. We reject Berlin's map. We reclaim our own. And that is why the West is scrambling. Washington's panic is not about stability, it's about control. Minerals like copper, cobalt, uranium, and diamonds are not luxuries. They are the arteries of the modern global economy. For decades, Western powers relied on dividing African states, forcing them into separate negotiations where each could be pressured. A united bloc flips the script. Together, they can demand fair prices, choose their partners, and look east to China, Russia, or South-South partners if the West refuses fair terms. The monopoly of Western corporations begins to collapse. That is why Western officials now speak in the language of concern. In diplomatic code, stability means stability of their access. Risk means risk of losing control. They are not afraid of chaos, they are afraid of African unity. But this alliance is not just about economics, it is about culture, identity, and liberation. Colonial borders did not only strangle trade, they rewired African minds. Generations grew up seeing neighbors as foreigners. A cousin across the river was suddenly another nationality. Visiting family meant papers, humiliation, and bribes. Africans were taught to look outward, to London, Paris, Lisbon, rather than inward to their neighbors. The alliance flips the script. Families are reuniting without checkpoints. Traders move with dignity. Students cross borders for school with nothing but an ID. Artists and musicians travel freely, blending traditions once silenced by colonial lines. Academic exchanges, sports tournaments, cultural festivals, all suddenly flourish with a vibrancy that decades of bureaucracy smothered. This is not just integration, it is a cultural renaissance. It whispers to Africans, you are not strangers in your own land. The economic ripple effects are just as profound. A copper truck that once wasted days at borders now moves seamlessly to Namibia's Walvis Bay port. Time is saved, costs cut, efficiency boosted. Lower costs mean African goods can finally compete in local and regional markets. A Botswanan farmer can sell beef directly to Zambia without losing profits to corrupt border officials. A Namibian factory can access raw materials from neighbors without endless obstacles. Infrastructure projects suddenly make more sense. A railway from Zambia's copper belt to Walvis Bay now serves not one country, but three. Energy grids, water systems, and industries can integrate across borders. In short, the alliance turns borders from barriers into bridges. And beyond that, it points to something even greater, a domino effect. Already, Zimbabwe, Angola, and South Africa are watching closely. If three nations can dismantle colonial borders, why not 5? Why not 10? Why not 50? This is the nightmare of Washington, Paris, and London. Because a borderless bloc is not just a convenience, it is a blueprint for a new Africa. An Africa that negotiates as one, sets its own terms, and refuses to play by foreign rules. Imagine if the continent's 1.4 billion people could move, trade, and work freely, creating the world's largest single market. Imagine African nations negotiating resource prices as one bloc, not as weak individuals. Imagine universities, research centers, and industries working together without colonial red tape. This is not fantasy, it is the logical extension of the Borderless Africa Alliance. The West knows it. That is why envoys rushed to Lusaka and Gaborone with promises of aid, loans, and security cooperation. But Africans have seen this movie before. Aid comes with strings, loans come with chains, security cooperation comes with bases, dependency, and foreign doctrine. The smiles may be polite, but the intent is clear. Keep Africa divided, keep Africa weak. Yet the alliance has exposed a weakness in Western strategy. Africans are not in the streets demanding aid, they are celebrating unity. The contrast could not be sharper. African joy at tearing down colonial borders, Western panic at losing colonial leverage. The truth is simple. Africa is no longer asking permission. The generation leading this movement is not afraid of Western disapproval. They grew up in the shadow of IMF loans that strangled economies, aid packages that came with political strings, and stability missions that entrenched dependency. They know every Western warning about instability is code for discomfort, and so their resolve hardens. For Africans, this alliance means a future where passports are not shackles, where mineral wealth circulates within Africa before feeding foreign markets, where young people can study and work across the continent without being treated as outsiders, where identity is not tied to Berlin's map, but to Africa itself. For the West, it signals the end of an era, the end of Africa as a warehouse of raw materials, the end of Africa as a military outpost for foreign powers, the end of Africa as a bargaining chip in global rivalries. Instead, it signals the rise of Africa as a power in its own right, charting its destiny. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of the Borderless Africa Alliance is not what it changes today, but what it makes possible tomorrow. By tearing down colonial lines, Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana have issued a challenge to the entire continent. Are you willing to stay trapped in Berlin's map? Or are you ready to redraw Africa for Africans? That question will decide not just the future of Africa, but the balance of the world itself.